Well, that's going to be the discussion of the sermonette today is all about Groundhog's Day and where did we get it from? Well, the first Groundhog Day, according to History.com, says the first official Groundhog Day celebration took place on February 2nd, 1887 in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. It was the brainchild of a local newspaper editor, Clymer Frias, who sold a group of businessmen and groundhog hunters, known collectively as the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club, on the idea. Well, these men, they trekked to a site called Gobbler's Knob, where the inaugural groundhog became the bearer of bad news when he saw his shadow. Nowadays, the yearly festivities in Punxsutawney are now presided over by a band of local dignitaries known as the Inner Circle. Its members wear top hats and conduct official proceedings in the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect. They supposedly speak to the groundhog in groundhognese. And every February 2nd, tens of thousands of spectators attend Groundhog Day events in Punxsutawney, in a borough that is only home to about 6,000 people. It was immortalized in the 1993 film Groundhog Day, which was actually shot in Woodstock, Illinois. But it draws a whole lot more people to this event nowadays because of that. Well, every year on February 2nd, tomorrow, crowds gather at Gobbler's Knob in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania to watch the groundhog emerge for the day. There will be 6 more weeks of winter. But if he doesn't see his shadow, spring is right around the corner. So if he sees his shadow, 6 more weeks. If not, and hopefully it's going to be cloudy tomorrow and he won't see his shadow. But so tomorrow, February 2nd on Groundhog Day, Punxsutawney Phil will be brought out of his tree trunk in northwestern Pennsylvania to determine how much longer winter will last. So how did this begin and why on this date? Well, the roots of Groundhog Day aren't as random as they might seem. The beginning of February marks the halfway point between the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, and the spring equinox, when the night and day are about the same length. Pagans would celebrate February 1st and or 2nd with Festival of Light to mark the very start of spring. That's right. Groundhog Day has its roots in astronomy. What you might not know about Groundhog Days is that it is an astronomical holiday. It's an event that takes place in Earth's orbit around the sun as we move between the solstices and the equinoxes. In other words, Groundhog Day falls more or less midway between December solstice and the March equinox. Each cross-quarter day is actually a collection of dates, and various traditions celebrate various holidays at this time of the year. February 2nd is the first of these first cross-quarter days. Of course, the division of the year into segments is common to many cultures. Our ancestors were more aware of the sun's movements across the sky than we are, since their plantings and harvesting depended pretty much on that. In the Celtic calendar, the year is also divided into quarter days, equinoxes and solstices, plus these cross-quarter days on the great neo-pagan wheel of the year, which this is an example of their wheel, how it's split into different 8 things, and they have 8 different festivals. As you can see on the top here, they have Yule, which is around, December 21st. Yule, which kind of relates to Christmas. Samhain, we already talked about that. That's Halloween. And Imbolc, which is what tomorrow will be celebrated. Now, the Gaelic legend says that if the goddess Cailleach wanted a long winter, that she would make the day bright so that she would have sunlight to gather more firewood. But a dreary day, she'd stay in because spring was on its way. Now, Imbolc in the Celtic seasonal calendar marks the beginning of the lambing season and signals of beginning of spring and the stirrings of new life. Now, the original word Imbolc means in the belly. Now, according to Wicca.com, Imbolc means the belly of the mother because it is where seeds are beginning to stir as it is springtime. It is time to let go of the past and look to the future, clearing out the old, making both the outer and inner space for new beginnings. This can be done in numerous ways, from spring cleaning your home to clearing the mind and the heart to allow inspiration to enter for the new cycle. It's a good time for wish making or making a dedication. Now, Imbolc is traditionally the great festival and honors Bridget. Now, Bridget is also known as Brigid, Bride, and Bridget. Now, she is the goddess of healing, poetry, and smithcraft. She is the goddess of fire, goddess of the sun, and of the hearth. She brings fertility to the land and its people and is closely connected to the midwives and the newborn babies. She is also a triple goddess. I spoke about that before. But at Imbolc, she is more in her maiden aspect of her Trinity form. Now, Bridget, she was a goddess of the Tuatha Danann. Now, the Tuatha Danann it's translated as the tribe of Danu or the tribe of Dan. She was a daughter of the chief of the gods, the Dagda, and was known as the goddess of healers, poets, smiths, childbirth, and inspiration. Her name means exalted one. The Tuatha Danann were known as a race of gods or demigods who defeated the Fomorians and ruled Ireland during its golden age. Now, the symbols that are attributed to Bridget and the goddess Bridget, and also to this festival of Imbolc, are the snowdrop. It's the first gift of spring and the bleakness of winter. Another symbol is the swan. The swan mates for life and represents loyalty, fidelity, and faithfulness. And swan feathers are used for powerful amulets. Another symbol is the flame. Imbolc is a fire festival, and a fire of all kinds is associated with Bridget, the fire of creativity and the productive fire hearth, or the hearth fire, and her fire wheel, which is called the Bridget Cross, which heralds her as a sun goddess. And of course, the Bridget Cross is another one of her symbols, and this is a traditional fire wheel symbol found in the hearths of homes throughout Ireland and beyond as a symbol of protection. And of course, they had the Bridget doll. Now, the Bridget doll is a very old tradition involved in the making of this bridge doll, which can be included in the ceremony or placed on in the bride's bed. Her name is also bride, in the bride's bed, to bring fertility and good fortune to the home. Another symbol is the serpent. No kidding. The serpent. In Celtic mythology, Bridget was associated with the awakening, hibernating serpent which emerged from its lair on Imbolc. Traditionally, serpents were associated with creativity and inspiration. The powerful Kundalini energy of the Eastern mysteries. Now, the paths of Earth's energy were called serpent paths, and at Imbolc they were stirred from their slumber. Another of her symbols is sheep, because Bridget's festival was the beginning of the lambing season, and you were to use milk cheese. Now, Imbolc's colors were white and silver for purity, green for the fresh burst of life, also pink, red, and yellow. Activities that you would do on Imbolc was candle lighting. That was a big thing, candle lighting. You would light candles or lamps in each room of the house right after sunset for a few minutes to honor the sun's rebirth. Stone gatherings was another thing that they did, snow hiking, searching for signs of spring, making of the bride's beds, making the Priapic wands. You can ask me later what that is. Like most of these pagan things, I really can't explain that in public, but they also would decorate plows and feasting, and of course bonfires were to be lit. So this was the beginning. This was actually being celebrated here by the Celtics in their time. Okay, all these traditions. So how does this explain Groundhog's Day? Well, let me say a very untrue statement. What's good for the pagans is good for the Christians. That's right, the Christians decided to adopt these principles. The Christian religion adopted a number of these themes as follows. February 1st, today, became known as St. Bridget's Day. And February 2nd, tomorrow, became known as Candlemas Day. Candlemas Day is to make and bless candles for the liturgic year. Now, the Celtic fertility and fire goddess Bridget was so loved as a pagan goddess that her worship was woven into Christianity, and she was christened as Saint Bridget. And that's what they're honoring today, is Saint Bridget's Day is today. She wasn't the only thing that the church appropriated either. Imbolc was rebranded as Candlemas. Candlemas is a holiday that's celebrated on February 2nd, tomorrow, to mark the 40 days since the birth of Jesus Christ, according to them. As Christianity spread throughout Europe, Imbolc evolved into Candlemas, a festival celebrating the presentation of Jesus at the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. The medieval Christians adapted the festival, and they would hand out candles. Now, the feast day falls 40 days after Christmas, marking the end of the period when the Jewish tradition would have considered Jesus' mother unclean after giving birth, if she gave birth on December 25th. She would have been allowed to now worship in the temple again. So February 2nd is also considered the day that baby Jesus would have been presented there for the first time. Therefore, the Feast of Candlemas is also known as the Feast of Christ's presentation in the temple. It commemorates the day when 40 days after his birth, according to Jewish custom, Jesus Christ would have been brought to Jerusalem at the temple. so that his mother could be ritually purified and offered to God with a sacrifice of the 2 turtle doves. Now, this presentation is mentioned in Luke, Luke chapter 2 and verse 22. Luke chapter 2 and verse 22. Now, when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were complete, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to sacrifice according to what it is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now let's look at this law of purification in Leviticus. In Leviticus chapter 12 and verse 1, then the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a woman has conceived and born a male child, then when she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. This was the traditions of the Jews, and this is what they did. Now, it was double the time that she would have to spend if a daughter was born. Well, after this, they were to go to the temple to offer a lamb for a burnt offering and also a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering. If she was not able to bring a lamb, which seems like in this case, then you can bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one as a burnt offering and one as a sin offering. So the Christian church started the 40-day count on December 25th, which conveniently brings us to February 2nd. But it's not really according to this calendar, because this is a little bit different. Yule was on the 21st, and this calendar is kind of, it's different between the days that kind of fall. They're not exactly on par all the time. They just decided to set dates. That's why kind of like the spring equinox is always shifting between different days. The same thing with the solstices and stuff, but that's another story. But here's another thing that they did according to the biblical count of the presentation. So, Jesus was proclaimed by the figure of Simeon. It was the old guy that was waiting around, that God told him that he was going to see the Messiah born. Well, he called Jesus the light to the Gentiles. So, hence, the candles that were lit on Imbolc to honor the rebirth of the sun became symbolically associated with the feast of Candlemas. That's where they get the name, Candlemas, to light the candles. And a special blessing of the candles and a procession with them would take place on this day. That's where they got the name for this. They just changed the pagan thing and brought it into under Christianity disguise. A Christian tradition of Candlemas was that the clergy would actually bless and distribute the candles needed for winter. The candles would represent how long and cold the winter would be. In certain parts of Europe, Christians believed a sunny Candlemas meant another 40 days of cold and snow. The Germans developed their own take on this legend, pronouncing the day sunny only if badgers or other small animals glimpsed their own shadows. When the German immigrants settled in Pennsylvania in the 18th and 19th century, they brought the custom with them, choosing the native groundhog as the annual forecaster. That's how we got Groundhog's Day. So to recap, the pagan holiday Imbolc was Christianized as Candlemas, which is still celebrated by many Christians today, and many different denominations of Christians do this. And of course, then the offshoot of this became known as Groundhog's Day. Candlemas is also, like I said, is also known as the Feast of the Presentation of Jesus Christ. But it's also the Feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary adapts the maiden goddess theme of neo-paganism and the Wiccan rituals. This holiday in the 4th century was actually held on February 14th, which is now called Old Candlemas, and was Christianized as St. Valentine's Day. They're all related. So on Candlemas, many Christians would bring their candles to the local church, and they still do, where they're blessed and then used for the rest of the year. For Christians, these blessed candles served as a symbol of Jesus Christ, who referred to himself as the light of the world. But again, they just totally twisted it and adopted another pagan ritual and made it and Christianized it. The Wiccans and other neo-pagans, they'll be celebrating Imbolc tomorrow.